Good evening once again, and welcome to Module 4 of our 2019 Match Official PD webinar series. Tonight we'll be focusing on the tackle and ruck. For those of you who don't know how to use the control panel in front of you, there is a question box where you can ask some questions throughout. Tonight what I'll be doing is trying to get through as much of the content as possible, as we do have quite a bit. And then we will be answering as many questions as we can. I'll be happy to stay tonight a little bit longer than our usual hour to make sure that we have enough time to get through it all and then be able to answer some questions. I already did receive a question about going over where we can find previous modules, and I'm actually going to get to that throughout at some point in the next few slides. So just be patient for that, and that one will pop up. Okay, so let's get started. Here we go. So the objectives of our webinar tonight, we will be looking at having you guys obtain a clear understanding of the laws of the game as they pertain to the tackle ruck. We're not going to list out all of the laws, obviously, but we will try and make sure we add some clarity around what the expectations are. You guys will be presented with some clear pictures of positive actions that should be rewarded, positive actions by players, that is. You should have an understanding of how the context of the game may influence our need to referee or manage certain situations differently in some cases, or not. And then obviously have an understanding of how to sanction foul play in this phase of the game, so at the tackle ruck area. Excellent. So as we do with most of our webinars, we look at how it is that this particular module or topic fits in with our Rugby Canada referee profile. So as most of them are, all of the skill sets or key factors that are listed there of the profile should be touched on in some way. But the most important ones that we will take a look at are obviously from a technical perspective, our tackler and a tackle assist clearly releasing. So I just reversed those words, just notice that. So keep in mind, it's tackle assist there should be. That our arriving players are arriving through the gate and on their feet. That we're looking to reward good contest and good clean out, which is down in our tactical area, as well as identifying what the game needs, so using our contextual judgment. And then finally, in our game management key factor, zero tolerance for foul play. We'll get into some of that a little bit later. So we're going to get into some discussion around, hopefully some video analysis and discussion around the roles of individuals who are involved at the tackle ruck. First, though, I do want to emphasize how much we do want to work on setting ourselves up for success. So none of what we're going to discuss throughout the rest of the evening really matters if we're not in an appropriate position to see what is relevant. Again, this isn't you must do this, but it is certainly the position of arrival at 45 degrees is a piece that I think will really help us maintain the same picture over and over as we go from tackle to tackle, knowing that every kind of situation or tackle ruck situation kind of evolves a little bit differently. There's some non-negotiables within that, as well as some areas where, okay, well, in certain contexts, these are the types of things we can look to try and do. So where can we find some of this, to answer Jeff's previous question? So we, module 3, or a couple weeks ago, was on positioning, or a few weeks ago, was on positioning. And where you can find all of our 2019 modules is on the Rugby Canada Communications YouTube page. So here's a link, and when we click on that link, we get to this website. So once you go into Rugby Canada Communications, you can also type it to search up there, get into our playlists. Our created playlists are 2019 Match Official PD webinar, and then I've already pulled up what module 3 would look like. So module 3 is here, and you'll see module 2 and module 1 that have all already been posted. Okie dokes. So we're not going to go over positioning today, other than to emphasize that we do want to look at arriving at 45. as we go through the rest of the videos, we can also take a look, are the examples we're giving where we see that we have referees maybe not making the decision we'd want? Is their positioning playing a part in what we're seeing? And finally, again, setting ourselves up for success, is the tackle safe? So before we get into any of the rest of this, if we don't have a safe tackle, we'll need to make some sort of a decision based on that. And we will do that at the end, mostly because that's where we're going to be needing to identify, where the stuff is going to be heading. Okay, the other part of setting ourselves up for success is, well, what is a decision-making process? And thank you to freedigitalphotos.net for providing this photo. But I think it shows that obviously every tackle or ruck situation can have a variety of decisions that might follow, or non-decisions, or deciding to not make a decision. So what we're going to try and do is just really simplify the process as much as we can. So we'll take a look at what's happening. We'll observe, obviously. We're going to decide whether or not there was a material effect to start with. So whatever it is that we're seeing, if it has a material effect, then we move on to the next part of the process. If it doesn't have a material effect, guess what? We're just going to play on. And then we need to make a decision here. Once we decide that it does have a material effect, what is our next action? Is it to play on? Even if it had a material effect, can we still play on? Likely not. So off we go, making our decision that it wasn't material. Do we need to manage it? Is it something where, we were always going to have slow ball, so why don't we just see if we can help get the ball out and then we can continue playing? Do play advantage, go straight to the PK, or obviously down to a scrum. So what we will take a look at, and the scrum being last there because, and I don't know, actually, I don't think I had an example of an unplayable, although I can probably dig one up. But anyways, the scrum being the last one because very few tackle ruck decisions end up in a scrum. So we're highly unlikely to make that decision, but if you do, then there's probably a good reason that we'll get to why we would want to make a decision like that. Okay, straight on to the video. So we're going to look first, before we get into some of the contextual nuances of the game, into, well, what are some of the roles we need to see? So the first one is that our tackler and tackle assist must not influence the contest. So we want to see that the tackler rolls away and that both the tackler and tackle assist clearly release. And I made sure to put this in all caps here. It's a non-negotiable. This is not an area of the game where we can allow the context, really, to dictate whether or not we make a decision here. These are the things that, in order for the ball to be available, we must see these things. Now, when we talk about tackler and tackle assist clearly releasing, we want them to clearly release the ball. That's the most important point here. So let's take a look at a few examples. Okay, so we had our referee make a decision after they observed that the tackler wasn't releasing after they made it onto the ground. Even asked the tackler to release, still didn't get compliance. Pretty easy decision. So we can watch that one more time. Number 3 gold to ground, and then doesn't release the ball.
Tackler, roll away. Tackler, pull to the side.
Okay, so easy example here of number 10, red, clearly not making an effort to move away. It doesn't really matter what happens next here. We're not going to get the type of possession that we want. Pretty easy decision to make here. Number 10, red, not rolling away. Okay, and we have one more.
ice. Number 9, part of the tackle.
Okay, so the first examples I picked were ones that were clearly available to us all to see, and also had the referee mic'd up to the situation, so it allowed us to hear what they were saying. This example is good for a couple of reasons. This last one, because we can take a look at the timing of the whistle, and we'll get into the nuances of refereeing a little bit later, but it also is just a clear example of what we're looking for. So blue or hoops or white, which could apply to both teams here. So Quebec is the defending team. We see the tackle assist on their feet, clearly not releasing the ball before we get a very messy ruck. So it's an easy decision for the referee to come back to it. Could they have played advantage? Could Chris have played advantage there, or could he have blown that a little sooner? That's what we would get into in the next part of our discussion. But infringement, tackle assist, clearly not releasing. Okay, arriving players must be through the gate. So this includes our tackler and tackle assist. No audio for this one, but pretty easy decision. I think Chris calls off feet, but he wanted to, I think he's the one who made the comment on, you know, what the actual first infringement, and we talk a lot about making sure we get the first infringement so that we both seem credible and we don't let things drag on. So the first infringement here is the red tackle assist, who is entering into that tackle area from the wrong side of the tackle after the tackle has been complete. Also, I'm going to put a little plug here. Thank you very much to BC Rugby's Coach Logic platform, which is where I was able to pull a lot of the non-Canadian Rugby Championship content. Some of it will have audio or not. None of it will have referee audio, unfortunately. So where we needed some of that, I tried to pull that in. But just one more quick example. We'll see the red tackle assist here. Never goes to ground, so he's not a tackler, obviously, but he never comes back around through his side of the gate, right? And he just causes a very messy ruck that we don't need to have. Okay, and then obviously arriving players must be on their feet entering in through the gate as well. So one of the triggers we can look at is, are we seeing hands or knees on the ground? The knees, on the ground can include on the player, the ball carrier or tackled player who's been tackled. So we'll take a look at a couple of examples throughout that might help us dictate. Okay, so the black player entering into the contact area here. It's number 11. Clearly comes in off his feet. Hands on the ground. Pretty easy decision. Okay, now we've seen a lot of, we see this a lot on the defensive side of the ball, but this includes the attacking side. So the attacking team and support players of the attacking team also need to arrive on their feet in order to either effectuate a clean out if they're going low, or obviously stay up. So what we'll take a look at is, what does sealing off look like? So this is where we can get into some of the nuances of the game, and well, we see attacking players with their hands on the ground all the time, and the answer to that is yes, we do. But the first question we have to ask ourselves is, was the defending team ever going to be contesting or in a position to contest for the ball? And the second is the player, support player, off their feet because they've cleaned someone else? They've cleaned out a defender and they end up off their feet. In this case, the answer to both of those questions is there is a defender who is in the position to contest, and we'll take a look in a sec, and the attacking player did not effectuate a clean out before getting off their feet. So we see that the attacking player clearly comes in underneath the potential defender here who can contest for the ball, in order to seal off the ball. So I think Dave would want this one back, and don't worry, Dave, I do you justice and pull out a couple good examples of you there. So just one more time, these are the situations where attacking players need to do a better job of either effectuating a clean out, or staying on their feet. But this player just simply clearly, for white, off their feet to seal off the ball underneath a defender who's in a position to contest. Okay, so keep that picture in mind. We'll get into what some positive actions look like a little bit later on. So finally, roles of individuals at the tackle and ruck area. When a defender or a defense has earned the right to the ball, that tackle player must release. And we're looking at whether or not that first defender did go straight onto the ball. Are they contesting the ball right away? There you go, Smarts. Okay, so what we see, and again, we'll get into the nuances in a moment about, how long do we wait and what do we want to see. But did that first defender go straight down for the ball? Did they survive the clean out? Which I probably should have put into this trigger piece here. And did they survive the clean out, with the ball, right? So if they have the ball the whole time, or it's really messy distribution, it's clearly not an opportunity for the attacking team to retain possession of the ball. Let's give it the turnover. So taking one more look, number 12, black, I guess, white shorts, does a really good job of coming around and works hard to survive the clean out here and has the ball throughout that whole process and only loses it really after the clean out takes that much longer to effectuate, right? So that's a good example of where we'd want to reward the defender. Right, so we've got some pictures and some ideas of what it is we want to see out of this ruck situation. So when we look at the game, knowing that most tackle ruck situations end up looking very different from phase to phase or situation to situation, what are some of the things that we can do to help us get some continuity, and how do we make decisions based on what the game needs? So the first thing that can help us sometimes are verbal indications, right? Especially with tacklers or tackle assists. Just say it once, make sure it's effective, and make sure, most importantly, that it's timely. So we've got a couple examples here that I'll play through.
Hands off.
So that's a really good example of a referee just using one word to help players understand, okay, well, what is my role now? So once a tackle has been complete, those who are holding onto the ball, whether it's a tackler or a tackle assist, should know that their role now is to release the ball and to move away if they're on the ground, or to come through the gate if they're a tackle assist. So it's a really good example of a timely use of the word where the referee knows, what, this player might not be sure. It's a slowish kind of situation, but if we get an action out of that one word, we can get some good continuity here. So it's one more look. It's a really good example. Tackle, player releases, and we move on to the next phase. We have it again here in this example.
No 13. Clear release, you're in tackle assist.
Right, so the referee says no 13. So I think Dale in this situation knows the players he's working with. So there's a bit of familiarity between the player and the referee. Ideally, in situations where you don't have that familiarity, using the color of the jersey also helps. So no 13 blue or release 13 blue is often used. I don't get too specific on prescription, only because sometimes what works best for some referees doesn't necessarily work best for others. So whatever works for you, but as long as it's clear and concise and timely. And then the question is asked, well, why? And he says, you're the tackle assist, you must clearly release. So just another example of an opportunity where the voice is effective, gives us a chance to be able to play on here.
Clear release, you're in tackle assist.
And off we go. So that's one of the things that can help us, certainly, is verbal cues. Where things get tricky is, what do we need to see out of the defense in order for us to be able to then reward the defense? So we often talk here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play these two through, and then we'll see what we think. This referee's awful, by the way. I could say that with this particular ref. So if our answer to the question of whether or not we can reward the defense here is no, which it should be, the question then well, why not? And it's obvious that the reason for that is the defense, who's on the ground after that last tackle, the defender, the tackler on the ground, does not allow the attacking team an opportunity to be able to actually effectuate a clean out. So it's really messy, but the reason why I wanted to show this one first is to look at the next one after. So we'll see at this next phase here, our red tackler staying on the ground, and it just doesn't allow that attacking team to be able to get low and use their feet where they need to in order to effectuate a clean out. So in order for the defense to be able to turn the ball over here, we do need to see them be perfect in a way in order for us to allow that turnover to happen. Got a great message saying it might as well be clipped what not to do, which is probably not far off. So here's where this kind of concept can get a little interesting, and we'll take a look. Sorry for the lag on this particular video, but it's like we're watching it in slow-mo.
He's fine.
Okay, so let's ignore the, well, actually that didn't work out because we didn't see the whole thing play out, unfortunately, because of the lag. Let's try one more time. I don't think that's gonna work. Let's see if I pause. Yeah, sorry. I don't know why that clip isn't working. But what I can try and do, oh, there we go. Maybe if I play it from here. So essentially what the referee did was he penalized the white team for not rolling away and not allow the turnover to happen. And I think what it led to is a question of, okay, well, at what point is the tackler clearly enough out of the way, even though they're kind of in the way of the clean out? Versus, well, no, they clearly had an impact. And it's really tough sometimes to differentiate because the tackler, in essence, and this is the language that came up in the discussion of this clip, was, well, the tackler can't disappear. We can't expect a tackler to disappear, which is correct. But then we came to the conclusion that, you know what, the tackler also has the options to go east or west or south towards their own team in terms of where they move to get away. Understanding, of course, that in soft type of tackle situations, the defender automatically ends up on the quote unquote wrong side of the ball. In that instance, we would expect the tackler to work from one side or the other to try and remove themselves from the tackle area, as opposed to even further into the attacking side of the ball, which might affect how those clean out or the cleaners come to try and effectuate their work. So let me see if I can just play it from here and see if we can see the clip the way we'd like to with the lag. So you see the tackler, just a little slow to move.
7. He's fine.
Yeah, it's just one of those situations where it's really tough because you have a lot of empathy. Most people have a lot of empathy with 7 white for making an effort to move away, and obviously 7 white has no impact on the timing of his first arriving teammates. But does he do enough to slow down the blue cleaners to prevent them from cleaning out? Probably, and that's kind of where we came to on that one. So these are the types of situations we're going to take a bit of a closer look at, and we're going to look at, great, so what are the situations that allow us to manage versus play on versus obviously having to penalize. So we get into what I'd like to call patience, right? So how patient do we want to be is what we'll take a look at. But at the end of the day, allowing ourselves the time to see the play happen and see if it can take care of what should be the outcome that we're looking for. So in these examples, we have some really good patience shown by the referees to allow these turnovers to happen.
First on.
So here Cole just uses 2 words, first on, so first arrivers on the ball. He's happy with the turnover. I think, it's maybe a little slow to come out, but there's no reason to blow the whistle here when we have a clear opportunity for the player on their feet, the defender by blue on their feet, to stay on the ball the whole way through, allow it to play itself out, and she comes out with the ball. We end up with a ruck, and we end up playing on. And I think that's a really good example of some patience there. And there's another one here. Really good job by Shanda there. It happens a lot quicker, but the blue player clearly on his feet in arrival, clearly on the ball, and survives that clean out with the ball in hand. We can play on. So I thought that was really well done. So then we get into the other end of the spectrum where we're like, oh, okay, well, maybe that's a little too much. And there's a couple of really good examples here of what are the effects on the game if we wait too long to make a decision. The other side of it too is, what are the effects of our credibility as referees when we do eventually decide we're going to have the whistle blown? So we get to the right outcome here. We get to the ball carrier or the tackled player not releasing the ball on the ground. I think if Schwartz were to have this one back, he'd probably wish he blew the whistle before moving across here. I think he gives it long enough here to see if this player survives the clean out. But as we wait for this, we get there, but it's just a fraction of a second longer. And the reason why we don't want that fraction of a second necessarily is not just the credibility piece, but the question of, okay, well, what might happen if we allow this play to continue? So no issues with the referee's positioning, no issues with red being first arriver on the ball, rights to the ball, survives the clean out here, and at this point we could probably say blow the whistle. Where we get into trouble is when we come around here, and I think we're lucky in this case, we don't have someone else from this blue team trying to come in and effectuate an even tougher clean out or harder clean out, which could cause some foul play, would probably be in the side, and might cause us more problems down the road. So I think if Schwartz were to have this one back, and I think he did say this on his coach logic review, he'd want this one blown up just a half second earlier before he came back around that other side of the ruck. And then here's the other side of waiting too long. It's, are we overthinking it maybe? Okay, so I think the point I'm getting at here is there's a whistle for the ball carrier not releasing on the ground, but we waited until the ball is clearly available, and there's a pass of the ball behind us before we blow the whistle. And I think that's one of those situations where we can probably just put it in our pocket. First arriver, actually, was the tackler, did a really great job. Release, get back onto his feet through his side of the ball. Clearly had his hands off the ball, done well there, but doesn't survive the clean out. And by the time he's on the ground, the ball's at the back, and the black player no longer has his hands on the ball. Didn't survive the clean out with the ball. It's on the ground. It's ready to play. I think we could probably play on from here. I think Smorts actually also acknowledged that in his review. So not to pick on Smorts, he does most things really, really well, far better than me, that's for sure. But just something to be aware of is what is the effects of that patience. So that comes back to one of the things I like to use as a trigger for me is, can I let the trigger do the work? The clean out do the work. If I can let the clean out do the work, I'm probably not going to have to, that probably gives me enough time to see if we can play on. So here's a really great example of allowing that clean out to happen. So Jeff here does a good job of identifying, the black player clearly on her feet, clearly over on top of the ball, has a crack, but the blue team is able to come in and effectuate the clean out, and the black player does not survive the clean out with the ball in her hands, and we'll see the ball at the bottom of the ruck here. Right, so I think there's a really good job here of Jeff to just let this one play itself out and see if we can get to the next phase, which we do. See another example here as well.
Over. No survival now. Hold back.
Excellent. So we have the referee advantage over from the knock on, I believe it was, and then we end up in a situation where the clean out takes care of whether or not we need to make a decision. It's really, really good work here by the blue team over the yellow team, I guess. Good position by the yellow player. She's on her feet, on the ball, but the clean out takes her off the ball. And he even says, didn't survive the clean out. This also is a really good picture, actually, both of them are, of when attacking players end up off their feet, where we can say we're going to play on, and we're going to take a look at both of those again here in a minute. But basically, we're looking at, did they clean out a player to end up off their feet? So in this instance, yes, they moved a player clearly past the ball, and it's not to take anything away from the effort defenders are making in this situation, but basically we're saying they're off their feet. The attacking team is off their feet because of quote unquote weak opposition. And it's not that they are weak per se, it's just that they weren't able to survive the clean out and allow for those players to stay on their feet to contest. So they end up off their feet. And I think in that situation, it's a pretty good example of how we can allow a player to be off their feet at the ruck, but really what they did was effectuate an excellent work at the clean out to take care of a defender beyond the ball. And I think that was two good examples of how we can allow that game or that situation to play itself out. Okay, so the other thing we want to try and do is make sure we're calling what is clear. So to everyone, I think most people watching both of those clips would look at, you know what, there's probably not a penalty in any one of those, whether it's for the ball carrier or the tackled player holding on, or whether it's for the attacking support players off their feet. And what we want to try and do is look at, if it's 50-50, is it an opportunity for us to keep the ball in our pocket? A lot of that, the penalty in our pocket, a lot of that depends on whether or not the ball was even available. So in situations where it is, I think those are situations that we can probably move away from. So that's a really good example of Jeff, again, using patience, but also recognizing that, you know, there's a lot of people or players, I say, one of each team basically, who end up off their feet at the ruck. Basically, it's a collapsed ruck, but we are able to play on as the ball is clearly available at the back. This is a good 50-50 decision for us to move on from. And I think our triggers here are, we have our first arriver in black, who's in a decent position to attack the ball, but is not in the best body position. I think her legs are maybe a little straight and maybe not in the strongest position. And the clean out is just a smaller player against a larger player, maybe not the most clean effort to move someone off the ball. So they end up both going to ground, okay? But we do end up with the ball clearly and quickly available for the 9, and we're able to play away. I think this is just a really good example of us not having to blow the whistle on a 50-50 decision here. Just some really good patience. So finally, this brings us to, well, foul play at the tackle ruck area. So I think we all know where this is going. Obviously, we have zero tolerance for foul play. So basically what I've done is at the end of every webinar, I pulled up these this one slide with where we can find some of our video resources. But I will, for today's session on the tackle ruck, take a look at some of those videos, especially with regards to dangerous tackles. So to put some of this into context, back in 2017, World Rugby implemented their kind of dangerous tackle policy around what our dangerous tackles look like and what our sanctions are going to look like. So we're going to watch an example of a penalty only situation, a yellow card situation, and a red card situation, knowing that these are contexts that we have to put into perspective when we go and referee every weekend, knowing we don't have television match officials and knowing we don't have necessarily assistant referees to help us. So what is it we're looking for, and how can we, not necessarily looking for, we don't want to be hunting for penalties, but what are the triggers that necessarily help us identify our criteria for some of these decisions?
It's the new instruction from the World Rugby. This is a tackle. He catches him on the shoulder, slips up, penalty, nothing else.
Okay, so I do want to take a look at that one. Oops, sorry. Once more, and the reason is because the context of what we referee every day might dictate that we penalize it differently. So I think the key thing to remember here is that the tackler starts below the shoulders, but does move their arm up through the completion of the tackle. Where I think the tackler ends up being very lucky is that he does not end up pulling on the head or the neck through the entire tackle. If he does, that changes obviously the decision, even though he starts below the shoulders. So the one thing I want us to be wary of is just because it starts below the shoulders and comes up doesn't mean it's only a penalty. It's the rest of the tackle situation that dictates, you know what, we don't need to go any higher than that. However, if the situation were different and the contact around the head or neck was more severe, even though it started below the line of the shoulders, then we can certainly escalate that sanction, and we'll take a look at what some of those examples look like.
tackle. He catches him on the shoulder, slips up, penalty, nothing else.
Okay. So we'll take a look at our yellow card.
Sensing maybe something is opening up outside of Petty on the charge. The referee has the arm out. I think he's got a high tackle. He slipped up and he's jumped up into him a bit though, hasn't he? He's got a fly.
So And I want to be very careful that we don't end up in a situation where we say, oh, well, direct contact to the head might only be a yellow card and not necessarily have a red card included. And the reason why I want us to be careful is because, again, we don't have television match officials in any case. We don't have assistant referees in a lot of cases. And the moment we see a strike that from a player over the head, over the line of the shoulders onto the head or neck area, we should be thinking red card. If we can find mitigating factors for which we can bring it down, understandable. But it is not incumbent upon the referee to find reasons for which a player's behavior shouldn't be sanctioned to the extent that it might be necessary. So in this case, if the referee was to deem, as was described by World Rugby, that the contact had moderate force and recklessness, then that's fine. The player gets up, there's no issues, no players removed because of a head injury. Clearly there wasn't necessarily intent. The finishing of the tackle is not great, which is why we can certainly elevate it to a yellow card there. So it's just things I want us to be aware of, in the sense that we're not necessarily looking to find reasons that aren't there to not red card an individual. If the red card is merited and it's because it's direct contact to the head, then that's fine. That's what we end up making as our decision. And we have to make these decisions in real time. So here's our red card example. I think this one's pretty clear to everybody. So what I would rather is that we do not play advantage in a situation like this. So pretty easy, and I don't know if as of January 1st this would have been a red card. I mean, I put that January 1st piece because that's when these video clips came out from World Rugby. The reality is this should always be a red card. The fact that the contact starts above the head or neck and continues through the entire tackle around there is reason enough to be able to warrant a red card. And I will show us one more example actually here. So it's just really poor effort by the tackler to get into a position. Let's not focus too much on what the announcers are saying around the ball carrier falling a little bit. The clear indication here, or the clear action here, is that number 12, Gold, does not do enough to put himself in a position to effectuate an appropriate tackle, leading with the shoulder through the height of the tackle, and then makes direct contact with the head of the ball carrier. So again, it's great for us to it's good for us to be able to get pictures of what is it we want to see in these tackle situations. The reality is we need to start with what the laws of the game dictate. Direct contact to the head is a minimum yellow card, and we're taking a look after that at, okay, how severe was the act, and doesn't merit a red card. And if it happens in the first 2 minutes of the game and it warrants a red card, then that's just the way it goes, and we hand out that card. Okay, so here's where we can get into a couple of other areas of foul play. Taking players out beyond the ruck, sometimes really tough to see in the act of or during the course of the game. So let's take a look here at an example. So I don't know if anyone caught that, but there's a late kind of red arriver at the top of the ruck who essentially clears a path for his number 2, I believe, who picks at the base of the ruck and takes that space that was just cleared for him with that clean out beyond the ruck. So we'll take another look here. Really tough to see these in live sometimes. So we'll see number 10, red, come across the top here. Sorry, 12, 13, someone. Definitely not 10. 10's on the left there. and take this blue player out just up top here, and it's just enough space for the next red player to pick through that gap. So that's an area where we do want to be concerned with, and the reason why we call it foul play is obviously because it's a form of obstruction which falls under foul play. So just something to keep aware of. So far more dangerous, obviously, is our neck roll. Here's a really good example of it. Okay, so good management comes here afterwards by the referee. I don't think we get to it, but there was a card handed out, which is appropriate. I believe it was a yellow card. So again, direct contact around the head or neck. Yep, and then follow through the clean out with their hand still around that part of their body. So clearly a penalty, clearly a yellow card at minimum. Everyone gets up okay. Now, it can be another difficult one to pick up, notably when you have more players involved in the ruck. So one of the triggers we do want to look for is late arriving players. Typically, players who arrive early at the breakdown don't tend to have to resort to the croc roll, and so they don't necessarily have that chance of their arm going around the neck area of that defender. But just to take another look, just because it is an area we do need to really be focused on, is when they're late arriving and we see number 10 blue here in a really good position to contest for the ball, that late arrival is usually when we have this croc roll action. It's just really poor execution by the attacking 7 here, 7 white, to try and make sure that he does this legally. So ideally, we'd rather see them come in underneath the chest of the 10 and try and drive them off using their legs. Not able to do that, so comes around the neck, and an appropriate sanction here by the referee. Oh, right, and then obviously our more dangerous one. So this is what I alluded to when Smorts had that moment where he waited maybe a little too long in that one ruck, and if you have third or fourth players joining in, how are they joining? Here's a couple of different situations. It's not necessarily a timing thing. I was actually speaking with Chris earlier today, and we were looking at a couple examples. These are the two that came to mind. Again, probably because of the referee here. But we'll see this player in black come in late and then straight onto the ground. Onto the player on the ground. That was a red card, and thankfully Latoya was on the sideline to help us out with that one. But we'll see here that the ball carrier tackle player goes to ground, gets back up to join the next tackle situation, and we'll see here the cleanout's already been effectuated. So once the cleanout's been effectuated, this player's responsibility is to maybe look at some other threats, perhaps, sure, but more likely just to secure possession of the ball. And instead, he decides to go and try and move this player who's already been moved further away for some reason. So these are the actions we do need to be aware of, right? So shoulder straight down onto the player on the ground, easy red card decision from there. And then one more example, kind of tough to see where the point of contact is on this one. But I think what we can try and see is that it was a shoulder that was led throughout this process. So it was a massive line break. I'll just play it out this one time. Right, so we have a pretty significant line break by white, and then we have the white number 3 supporting player coming in. And it's not necessarily late, but he comes in with a shoulder, and we'll try and pick it out here. And then we see obviously that player, the blue player, go flying off the ruck here. So we'll see number 3 with the scrum cap coming in just a fraction late, but we see clearly leading with the elbow going into this contact situation. So tough to see. I say clearly, it's tough to see, but these are the actions that the referee rightly penalized, because we don't want to see players going in leading with their shoulder. Okay. Charging into ruck. Perfect. Okay. Finally, some notes for coaches and match officials. And we can get to a few questions. So I think that the first thing a CMO will want to ask themselves in terms of what they're seeing the referee do is, well, is the referee starting by putting themselves in the best position to be successful? So this includes their positioning, right? And what is relevant? Are they seeing what's relevant first? And are they addressing that? And we talked a bit about, are we getting the first infringement? We had that example of Chris penalizing the player for being off their feet, when in fact the first infringement was really the fact that they entered through the side of the gate. So in a situation where that plays itself out differently and longer, do we maybe have a bigger mess, and are we addressing the issue that needs to be addressed? So all the things that we touched on, no referee can really work on all of these things at once. So I think the biggest question is, have they identified what they need to address pre-match? Preferably one or two things, and have they identified a process to try and achieve that goal? And that process can be very individual. Some need a checklist, so tackler, tackle assist, arriving players. I would encourage those who focus on checklists to have flexibility for what the game needs in those situations. So oftentimes we say, and the tackler, I mean, I have no problems with everyone saying the tackler is our first priority on the checklist, sure, mostly because it's a non-negotiable. But when we say, well, tackled player release the ball and arriving players on their feet, well, if there's no arriving player, why are we worried about the tackled player? And I think it's just one of those things where the checklist, although can certainly help us in identifying the things that need to happen, they aren't always happening in that order. So we just need to be aware of having that flexibility. And then, others need pictures of specific scenarios, and we looked at a few. There's always going to be more, and we can try and look at a couple of others. And the other one is needing verbal triggers. So some other people might need, and other people might need other things, i.e. this webinar. So that's a quick look at the tackle ruck area. In one of the pieces I've certainly taken away in putting this together is how vast this topic is. Probably too vast and too large for us to have put into one webinar. Knowing this, I'd probably change that going into next year, just because of the number of different varieties of scenarios that can happen. These are the things we would want to make sure we address. So with that in mind, happy for us to take some questions. I know I got one by email actually, and I believe it was with regard to playing advantage. Oh, a question about why not always calling advantage. Right, okay, so certain situations we cannot call advantage. There's it's not an option for us necessarily in instances of foul play. These obviously being some really good examples here. There's no advantage ever going to come out of a situation where players are charging into rucks with shoulders, or we have some severe dangerous tackles. Like there's no room, especially in the domestic game and especially at under 19s, there's no room for playing advantage in those situations. The other situations I would be very wary of playing advantage on. I'm just gonna exit this so I can get there a little bit faster. But in other situations where we're maybe getting, we want to be careful about playing advantage is, well, if we wait too long to play an advantage or call an advantage, are we actually hindering things further? So it's really tough for us to play advantage on a situation where we should get a turnover. And the reason being that the turnover is often reward enough, right? So for us to play advantage for the player on the ground not releasing the ball, I think we're giving the defense more than I think what the acceptable outcome in that situation would be. If they've successfully turned it over, I don't see why we would ever play advantage. If they haven't successfully turned it over, then we have to call a penalty because we can't play on, right? So those are some examples of situations where we can't necessarily play advantage. So a point here about just being careful that we don't think that a jackler must survive a clean out. So it's a good point about, again, how much patience is too much patience. A lot of this depends on the timing of the situation. So I think an instance where the player, the first arriver, has clearly gotten the ball in their arms and is able to actually even try and do a lifting motion, that's probably enough for say, you know what, we should probably see them with the ball here. And if they don't survive the clean out, we can definitely come back to the player on the ground holding the ball, especially if we see a clear lift motion of that ball as they've tried to contest for it and the player on the ground has not released it. I think that's a good example of where we don't necessarily need to see that clear out. I think the point we need to make sure we maintain around that is what is enough time for us to see that. And I think the probably best example is where we had the good poach. I think it was this one here. Just that example of where we have enough time. No, I don't think it was this one. Anyhow, I get certainly a point well made, Karen, but if we want to get into some of that, that's great. Like, it's just, yeah, waiting for the purpose of our patience is not to necessarily wait for a clean out to last forever and they have to survive that whole ordeal. It's did they have enough time to earn the right to the ball? If they did, let's find a way to reward them, certainly. Another question about whether or not if a tackler or if a tacklee falls on their head after being tipped more than the horizontal, is it a red card no matter what provoked the tipping, like a difference of height? That is correct. So tip tackles are one of those where we're just looking at to be fair, probably should have been in here. So I can certainly add that into our next one and make a note of just putting that reminder out. But yes, tip tackles, no matter what the cause of the situation is, for the most part, once the tackler lifts that tackled player above the horizontal, then we're probably dealing with a minimum yellow if they land on their side or their back, and then certainly a red card if they land on the top of their shoulder, their head, or their neck. So, yeah. And the best thing I can help ask coaches as they work with their players in that tackle piece to do is for the tackler to keep their legs moving forward. Most tacklers who get into trouble with the tip tackle is because they stop moving their legs forward and actually then just stand up or lift. And as soon as they stand up, their next inclination is to tip or lift the player across the horizontal as they follow that momentum. So asking tacklers and having them work on keeping the leg drive will eliminate the vast majority of tip tackles, in my opinion, for sure. Okay. To be fair, I think that's it for the moment. Don't see any other further questions at the moment. If anyone has anything that they want to follow up with me on, please feel free to send me an email. Most people on this webinar will have it. And I hope to see you all again in about 3 weeks. Our next one is May 14th. We'll be going over the scrum on May 14th. So looks like that's it for questions. Thanks again to everyone who attended tonight, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.